Hey guys, so in this video, I'll break down everything you need to know about prompt engineering inside of AI agent and AI automation systems. Now, I know there's a ton of content out there on prompting, but I find most of it either very theoretical or without a focus on prompting inside of AI agents and AI automations. So in this video, I'll try to be very practical and second of all, really focus on prompt engineering for these AI agent and AI automation systems. Now, I think many people think they know prompting because they can use ChatGPT efficiently. And trust me, I've been there too. But prompting inside of these AI agent and automation systems is actually very different than prompting from within ChatGPT. With ChatGPT, you can go back and forth as much as you want really to get the right output. So understandably, most people don't really worry or focus on using best practices. And to be fair, you don't really need it. But when you're designing these AI automation or AI agent systems, you first of all don't have the luxury of that back and forth tweaking. You need to get it right with a single prompt. And second of all, when you actually start implementing these systems inside of businesses and start running it on a large volume of tasks, you need your system to be consistently reliable, even with the edge cases. And that really does require good prompt engineering. And again, I've learned this the hard way. So in my opinion, good prompt engineering is really the number one core skill you should master when you want to deliver reliable AI systems to companies. Now, if you don't know me yet, I'm Ben. I've been implementing AI agents and AI automations inside of companies since the end of 2023. Now, just a disclaimer, I'm not pretending to be some genius prompt engineer. I don't have a PhD in AI or anything like that. I'm still learning every day myself. I'm also very aware that there are many different ways to efficiently prompt. And except for a few proven and studied techniques, there are lots of ways to get consistent outcomes. This is just an overview of what I've learned, what works for me, and hopefully it can help you. But again, this is not the only way to do it. So I've broken this video down into 5 sections. In the first section, I'll give you just a high-level overview of some key concepts that I think you should know when prompting inside of these AI automation systems. Then I'll go over my prompting frameworks, which include short structured prompting, long structured prompting, and agent prompting. And I'll also give you my initial take on how to prompt the new GPT-o1 model. Then I'll go over all the most common prompt use cases you will actually find when you're designing these AI automation or AI agent systems. And I'll give you my recommendations for each of the use cases on which prompt framework to use, some examples, and also which model to use to get the most ROI out of your system. Then I'll go over very quickly some other prompting use cases that you'll need in agent systems, like tool input prompting and sub-agent prompting. And lastly, I'll go over my recently updated agent prompting tool. Now, this tool doesn't replace your agent prompt, but it will help you write them better and faster. And I'll explain you quickly how to use it. Now, before starting, why do we actually need good prompt engineering? You've probably heard the phrase English is the new programming language by now. And I think it's very true because non-coders like me can now build extremely powerful applications and automations with just plain English. But communicating with LLMs is different than with humans. So learning how to efficiently communicate with LLMs is, in my opinion, the number one core skill in building these AI systems. And it will also increase the reliability of your system. It will increase the accuracy of your system. And also it will lower the cost of your system, which becomes very important when you actually start implementing these systems inside of businesses and start running it on large volume tasks. So here are the key concepts I just want to go over very quickly. First of all, as I said, there's a big difference between conversational prompting and structured prompting, right? Conversational prompting is what we do inside of ChatGPT, where we go back and forth until we get the right output. Now, we don't have that flexibility inside of our systems, so that's why we use structured prompting, right? And structured prompting basically follows a framework and incorporates proven best practices, right? So that's really what we're trying to do with structured prompting, right? Is first of all, we're trying to incorporate those best practices. Now, want to make this video practical, so I'm not going to go over them in depth, but we want to incorporate these studied and proven techniques like role prompting, few shot prompting, chain of thought, emotional manipulation, and markdown formatting. And to ensure that we incorporate those best practices, we use a framework, right? So that framework basically serves to incorporate those best practices, to have a good structure in your prompt. But maybe most importantly, it will give you a framework for every time when you need to write a new prompt. By going through that framework yourself, you basically make it easier for yourself to always optimize your prompt and make sure that you include everything that you need to include. And then lastly, in these structured prompting, we really want to always go for single task optimization, right? LLMs are not good at performing multiple tasks. So we always want to optimize these prompts for one specific small task, right? And if we have complex tasks that have to be done, that's where chain prompting comes into play, because basically we break that complex tasks down into separate tasks and put it in a chain where we use the output of the previous language model into the next language model. And through that system, through that chain prompting, we can increase the reliability and the consistency of our system. So this is just an example of a tool that I delivered to a client, which is a reformat CV tool. So basically, this client needed to take an original CV from a candidate and basically put it inside of a new layout and also take out the contact information. So instead of trying to do all of that inside of one LLM step or language model step, which would not have that much reliability, it would make mistakes, etc., we break that complex task down into smaller tasks, like first organize the text, right? Then reformat the CV, then take out the contact info, and then HTML format the new CV. So do we always need these really long structured prompts? Now, in my experience, no. Sometimes we can get away with short prompts. Now, really depending on the use case and the complexity of the task, in my experience, sometimes language models actually get confused with these really long prompts for simple tasks. Second of all, we're also trying to, of course, make this system as cost efficient as possible. And the longer our prompt, the more it's going to cost us. And thirdly, it also saves you time. So depending on the use case, and for some of the simpler tasks, we can actually use a short structured framework, which I invented. But basically, therefore, we have three different frameworks, which is the short structured framework, the long structured framework, and the agent framework. Because for agents, we also use a slightly different setup to make those agents as efficient as possible. Now, when do we use which one? That really depends on the use case for your prompt. And basically, I've identified 6 of the main use cases for prompts that you will find when you're designing these AI systems. And the first one is extracting data. Then we have generating content, classification or categorization, evaluation, data transformation, and decision making. Now, of course, these are very broad categories, and there are a lot of specific use cases underneath each of those. And if I'm forgetting a big one, please let me know in the comments below. But I've basically boiled it down to these 6. And later in this presentation, I'll give you my recommendation on which prompt framework to use for each of the use cases, which language model to use for each of these use cases to get the most ROI out of your system. And I'll give you an example for each of these. But before that, I do want to go over the 3 prompting frameworks. So first I'll do the long structured prompting framework. Then I'll do the short prompting framework because it's basically a reduced version of the long one. Then I'll go over the agent prompting framework, and then I'll give you my initial tips on prompting with the GPT-o1 model, which is a little bit different than with the other models. Now, before showing you the framework, very quickly, if you don't know yet, Markdown formatting is basically a way where you can structure your prompt with headers, bold, etc., which OpenAI actually themselves use in their system prompt. So it's probably a good idea. And it seems like these language models understand, and therefore they can understand sort of different sections and, importance of things by using Markdown formatting, right? And second of all, it also helps you structure it. If you use Relevance AI, you'll see it pop up like that automatically, right? So the way you do it is basically you use 1 hash for H1, a double hash for H2, 3 hashes for H3. Then you have 2 asterisks on each side of the word or sentence for bold, and a dash for a bullet point. And you can actually use 3 dashes to get that line you see here. These are the ones I use, and I think is everything you need in terms of Markdown formatting. So let me go over the framework for the long structured prompts. Now, again, this is not the only way you can do this. There are multiple ways. This is just how I do it and what works for me. Now, basically, I have 7 sections inside of these long structured prompts, which is the role, the objective, context, instructions, examples, variables, and notes. Now, I'll go through each one very quickly and explain what you should do in each one. But if you want to look at this in detail, I'll also make sure to add the link of this presentation inside of my free community if you want to check it out in more detail. So basically, first we have the role, also sometimes called persona, right? These namings really don't matter that much. It's more, again, a framework for you to to make sure that you include everything you need to include inside of your prompts. So in this role prompt, of course, quite extensively studied that if you give these language models a role, they seem to perform better, right? So besides assigning a role, we also want to assign qualities. And these qualities, we can basically describe, we can give it qualities for the specific task we're trying to execute with this prompt, right? So I tried to put in here the way you can think about phrasing this or coming up with this part of the prompt in each of the sections. So in this case, just try to imagine giving the greatest description of someone you could ever give, right? Because besides assigning this role and these qualities, we also really want to hype it up in terms of how good at it is at that specific task, right? So useful sentences could be, you're a world class, right? With particular expertise in, right? So an example here, you can see I use the markdown formatting, right, to get an H1, right? You're a world-class CV formatter with a particular expertise in carefully reformatting an original CV into a new layout, right? So give it a role and some qualities, right? Now, if you're using Relevance AI, you can actually add this part, this role prompt part of the prompt inside of the system prompt. So if you click here on advanced settings in your LLM step, you actually see here this field system prompt, and you can add that part of your prompt in there. And some people say it gives you actually better outcomes. Now, for the second part, we have our objective. Also, some people call it task, which is basically a direct description of what needs to be done. And you can think of this as, what would you tell ChatGPT, right? So it's really just a direct description of what needs to be done in this prompt. And it's one of the most important part of this prompt, right? Some useful sentences, you can always start with something like, your goal is to, right? And we can also incorporate this chain of thought in this section, which is also proven to improve outputs, right, and outcomes. So we can use this think step by step. So for example, your goal is carefully read the original CV profile and reformat the CV into the new format. You'll think step by step through the following process to ensure a good outcome. 1, carefully read the original CV. 2, add content from the original CV into the new layout for the new CV. And 3, add any information that was present in the original CV, but that doesn't have a clear place to input in the new CV to the end, right? So just a high level overview of what it has to do, right? And then we have the third part, which is the context part. Now, this is basically you're describing to the language model, why is it doing this task? So you show him how this task basically fits into the bigger picture. And why do we do this? Again, it's been sort of studied that if you give the language models an idea of the bigger context and why it is doing it, it actually can improve outcome too. So some useful sentences you can use here are, it is vital to my career, which it sounds crazy, but these sort of what they call emotional manipulation tricks also seem to improve outcomes. So why not use them? So in this case, for example, this task is crucial for our recruitment firm. The reformatted CV will be sent to potential clients, and therefore it is vital to my career that the CV is reformatted in the specific format mentioned below. It is also vital to my firm that information from the original CV doesn't get lost or is changed, as this would undermine the quality of the CV. Right, so just a high-level description of why this task is important or how it fits into the bigger picture. Then we have the fourth part of our prompt, which is instructions. Now, some people also call them rules or specifics. Now, basically in this part, we're going to really go into details, right? So usually we want to include in this part all the rules, right, that it has to follow. We want to also output structure specifications if we have them. So if it needs to, output it in a specific format like JSON or a specific sort of structure, then we want to lay that out here too. And the way I usually approach this section is basically I start predicting before I actually run it what could go wrong in the output, right? And that's sort of how I come up with these rules, right? So also, again, some useful sentences here. With these rules, you can play around a bit with these emotional manipulation tricks. It really sounds crazy, right? It's like, I will tip you $1,000 if, right? And you put in the rule, it is vital to my career, or caps, important, right? It sounds crazy, but it seems to actually really work. So why not use it? So here I have an example, right? It is absolutely vital to my career that you do not add text, make new facts up, or edit anything from the original text, right? And then I go through all the rules, right? Things that might go wrong, that you can already sort of predict that might go wrong, put them in here, or put things when you run it, and you see things that go wrong, you can also add that in here, right? And then also in this case, I also have output specifications, which you can see I actually used an H2 header here to let the language model know this is still part of the instruction section, right? So here's the new format for the CV, right? I put in the output specifications and that's it. So that's it for the instructions. Then we have examples. Now, of course, examples is one of the most important part of our prompt. It's been really well documented right now that giving input and output examples does increase the reliability of these prompts so much more. So this is really important to do. And one tip, if you don't have any examples, just leave this section out first, run it once with the best model you can, then let it run, get an output, right? Change it if you need to make it better, and then use that as an example, input and output. Because it's better to do that 2-minute extra work because it will increase that reliability so much more. So the way I do it is, again, I have the H1 header with examples, then I put a H2 header with example 1, and then I have bold input, and I put in the input, right, and the output bold, and this is the output, right? So in this case, to not make it really long, I only put in 1, but in general, good to do 2 at least. So that's it. Then the next part is the variable, which I call the variable. Basically, if you're going to feed it a variable, then put it in this section. So this section will change depending on what the prompt is about. So in this case, this CV you will reformat today, right? And then I put in the variable where they output the original CV, right? So any variable you might have, I usually do it under a separate header in this 6th sort of section. And then lastly, we have notes. And notes, in my experience, and I've incorporated this only the last few months, have been really important because LLMs actually take the beginning and the end of prompts more into account than the middle of the prompts. And especially that's the case for these longer prompts. So what we want to do in this note section is really double down on all the important things. So all the important rules, we can double down on output formats, which is of course also very important for our prompts. And we can also double down on best practices like this chain of thought, like think step by step. And then also really useful if you see your model making mistakes or not doing what you want the model to do, then add those things where it goes wrong, those rules or whatever inside of this notes section. And you'll see that it will actually start correcting itself very quickly if you add them here in the notes. Instead of course, you can always add it in the instruction section too, but because it's at the end of the prompt, it usually corrects itself very quickly. So again, you can use some emotional manipulation and chain of thought. So here's just an example. It is absolutely vital to my career. So basically just use some of the core rules, right? Again here, and that's it. So that's it for the long structured prompting. Now, basically for the short prompt framework, we basically reduce that long one down to the most important parts, which are the objective plus instructions, right? The rules, the examples, and the variable. Of course, we need the variable if that applies, right? So basically these two things. So you can see here I have an example. Please identify the name from the person in the CV below. So in this prompt, all we need to do is get the name from that CV. Right now, that's a really easy task, right? So we don't have to go with this whole long prompt because it's a really easy task. And we don't actually want to spend this amount of tokens on a long prompt when it's such a simple task, right? So you can see basically here I have the objective in one sentence. Please identify the name from the person in the CV below, right? And then here I have the instructions, the 2 rules, right? Only output the full name, no summary, no explanation, nothing but the full name. Now, this is a useful sentence, by the way, if you struggle with your model outputting more than just the name, because if you don't instruct it to do this, a lot of times what you'll see is your language model will say something like, the name of the person in the CV is Ben van Sprundel, instead of only the name, right? And sometimes we only really need that name because we're going to save it somewhere or we have a condition after. So if you want to make sure that it only outputs, let's say a URL, or in this case, only the name, then this is the way I found that works really well for it to never give an explanation or nothing like that. So only output the full name, no summary, no explanation, nothing but the full name, right? And then I've put in another one, which is also good if there is a chance that the name is not present, for example, or in any other prompt use case where there's a chance that the information it's looking for will not be available, then it's very good to add this. If you don't find a name, only output, no name found. Nothing else, no summary, no explanation. Now, it's very important to define what to do if you can't find it, because if you don't, what you'll see is they're going to start hallucinating, or they're going to use example outputs, right, from your example sections. So very important to instruct these models also what to do if they can't find it, right? Now, in this case, I've not even put in an example input, because this is this huge blob of text, a huge CV, which is going to cost us a lot of tokens. And it's such a simple task that all I do is I give it an example output, so it understands that I only want the name as the output, but that's it. But of course, for other use cases, when you might not have a huge blob of text, in general, it is good practice to put in the input too, at least. And then, of course, the variable, the CV, you have to identify the name from, right? And then we have the variable. But yeah, like this is sort of the short prompt framework. Now, of course, what you can do is if you see your model is actually struggling, then you can slowly add more sections to it to make it work, right? So you'd probably first try the example input to add that here, see how it goes then, right? Then you go and you add the role prompt, right? Then you add maybe the context. And then lastly, if it's still struggling, you can add in the note section to double down on rules, right? But you can sort of think of it like that. If it's a simple task, just start with this simple template. And then if it's still struggling, you can always add some other things on top. Agent prompting is the hardest type of prompting. And that's because agents usually have multiple responsibilities. And as I said before, language models are not good at performing multiple tasks. And agents usually are in charge of quite a lot of different things. And that's why the prompting becomes very important. And it's also why these agent systems sometimes fail, right? So first of all, it's really important to know that we want to give as little responsibilities to our agent as possible, right? So our AI agents, ideally, their only responsibility is in decision-making, right? When to use which tool and in which order, or sub-agent, which is sort of this decision-making part. And of course, our agent also needs communication, right? So it either communicates with us or with their sub-agents. And that's already multiple responsibilities. And therefore, we really want to offload all the other work that has to be done in this system to tools and sub-agents, right? We really want to reduce down that responsibility to the core bare minimum. And this is really ideal for a functioning AI agent system. And therefore, because it's hard to do and language models struggle with multiple tasks in this decision making, we always want to use the best models, right? So for example, we never want our agent to, besides using tools, etc., to also, for example, your job is to categorize an email, write an email, or generate content. No, we'll never want to do that. We want to go for something like, your job is to manage my inbox and decide the right course of action to take according to the instructions given to you. You have the following tools available to you: categorize email, write email, generate content. So he's not doing this himself. This is done by the tools or the sub-agents. Now, I wanted to mention this quote that I recently heard from someone who's built a lot of AI agents, which stuck with me because I think it's very true. The solution to problems of AI is usually more AI. And I think it's very true for the AI agent space. If your agent, which most people have seen, doesn't behave or perform the way you want, usually the solution is more AI in the forms of tools or sub-agents. So the things he can't do or the things that go wrong, usually you can solve it by adding in another tool and adding in extra AI there or another sub-agent. So what is the framework for our AI agent prompting? It's very similar to the long structured prompting, but with two main differences. First, it has a section called SOP. Because it is usually in charge of this decision-making process, we want to give it more context, an idea through an SOP, like what do you have to do in which case, right? And second, of course, most agents have access to tools or sub-agents, and we have to actually add in a section where we describe what these tools can do and how to use them, right? So those are the two main differences. So very quickly, right? Role persona is very similar to the long structured prompt, right? You're Ben van Sprendel's world-class personal assistant manager agent with particular expertise in meticulous and accurate management of his personal administration related to his email inbox, calendar, and Notion databases, right? Objective and task. Here we can just give a high-level overview. We don't have to go into the detailed SOP here just yet. So what is his general responsibility, right? Again, we can use these sentences, right? Think step by step. And in this case, using your team of specialized agents. So Your goal is to help Ben perform tasks related to his email inbox, calendar, to-do list, and YouTube content calendar using your team of specialized sub-agents. Think step by step to ensure thorough and accurate task management. When Ben sends you a request, you have 3 key responsibilities. 1, decide which sub-agents to delegate tasks to. Communicate clearly to the sub-agents what needs to be done. And then thirdly, communicate any work that has been done by your sub-agents back to Ben using the Send WhatsApp tool, right? Then the third is context. Why is it doing this task again, right? Very similar to the long structured prompt, right? You will trigger a request from Ben. As Ben's world-class, same thing. Not that important. Then we have the SOP, right? Which is unique to these agent systems. So very important also in these agent systems. So break down the steps in a numerical way, right? So what are the steps to take in the process, right? And then you can use if statements for conditions, right? Also, you should double down if you're using relevance on the SOP inside of the flow builder. That's really where it translates to. And in that flow builder, you can double down on it, but more on that later. So you can see in this case, it's quite a simple SOP. There are more difficult ones. It is vital to Ben's career. You also think step by step through the following process. You also want to use that chain of thought prompting in that SOP, right? Decide which agent, right? In this case, very similar as the objective, but normally if you have maybe a more detailed SOP or more complex agent, you'd have to go in more detail here, right? So 1, 2, 3, right? But sometimes you can go 1.1, right? If this happens, then 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and then 2, right? You give it sort of exactly what it has to be, what it has to do in the right sequence, right? Then we have, again, our instructions or rules, right? Important rules, double down on important rules for the SOP, communication rules with the sub-agents. Again, you can think of it, what can go wrong in the output, very similar as the long structured prompt. And then we have our tools and sub-agent section, which in this part, you want to give as much context as possible to your agent on what these tools do, when to use it, and how to use it. So, example, in this case, we are describing sub-agents, right? So, in Relevance AI, by the way, you can use a slash, right, to find your tools and your sub-agents, just so to make it even clearer. So in this part, you can see, first you've been equipped with 1 tool and 3 sub-agents to achieve your goals, right? I give it the first sub-agent, email manager agent. This agent can handle all tasks related to Ben's inbox, including getting emails, sending emails, and writing emails, right? So I describe what they can do, right? Then I have another section, when to use, for any task related to Ben's email inbox, right? And then how to communicate. Now, this one is actually also important because we want our manager agent, which in this case is a manager agent, to communicate clearly to our sub-agent, because if it doesn't, our sub-agent can't do their work properly and the system will fail. So when you delegate a task to email manager agent, be as detailed as possible when instructing him what to do and include all relevant details. And I even add in an example. For example, please retrieve all unread emails from Ben's email inbox from the last month, right? And then we go through all of them. For tools, we do the same, right? But we don't have to, of course, specify how we communicate because they don't communicate with tools. But what we can say is like expected output of the tool or things like that. So this tool sends messages to Ben through WhatsApp. You will always use this tool to communicate, and I didn't finish here, but to communicate any updates, questions, etc. to Ben. Right, and then lastly, examples. Now this is an interesting section because, of course, in these agent systems, it's more about following a process, an SOP, and it's not really an input-output, right? So you might ask, what do we do in the example section? And many people don't even use it. In my experience, it's actually really good to still use this, and it will improve the outcome a lot. So instead of an input-output, what I think the best way to do this in agent systems is we put in an input. So we give it an example of a request, right? And then we give it an example of his SOP for that request, right? So it understands what to do with 1 or 2 requests. And in my experience, this really helps. So for example, you can see here, example 1, input, please schedule a meeting with John Doe tomorrow at 3 p.m. to discuss the new project. Also send him an email confirming the meeting invite, right? So first, we show him the SOP he should follow, right? Your SOP, decide which agents delegate to calendar manager agent and email manager agent, right? Then instruct calendar manager agent, and we even describe what he would have to tell him, right? Please schedule a meeting with John Doe tomorrow at 3 p.m. Sao Paulo time to discuss the new project, right? And same for the email manager agent. And then last step would be to communicate back to me, right? Inform everything that has been done by your sub agents back to Ben via send WhatsApp tool. And then example again, the meeting with John Doe has been booked at 3 p.m. Sao Paulo time, and the email has been sent to confirm the meeting, right? And then we can even add in the email, right? So it knows how to communicate back to you. But this really, in my experience, really helps when you see your agent is struggling following this SOP. And by the way, you can even instruct. What I noticed helped a lot is if you have these edge cases where it sort of goes wrong, like in general it goes well, but there's some edge cases where it doesn't go well, then put those edge cases in as the examples, right? Same, by the way, for prompting inside of AI tools, right? With the long structured prompt, if you give them examples of these, how to handle these edge cases, you'll see that the outcome for these edge cases will be a lot better. And then lastly, notes, same as the long structured prompt, right? Double down on any important roles, double down on anything important in the SOP, etc. Lastly, very quickly, on prompting the GPT-01, this is going to probably change prompting a bit for these specific models because they're fundamentally designed in a different way. Now, we're very new to this, and it will also depend on the use case, but at least what OpenAI put out there is that keeping prompts a little simpler seem to work better for these types of models. So we might not have to go extremely long. I think it's still good to have this framework in mind. We might not have to give it as much context as we do in our long structured prompt, for example, because they say these models are trained to work best if you write simple, straightforward prompt. So especially that sort of task or objective part of the prompt is going to be very important. They won't need extensive guidance because they can find the optimal path themselves, right? And then also they recommend to avoid using chain of thought prompting because, of course, this chain of thought prompting is baked inside of the model already, right? Using your own reasoning in the prompt won't work or even might hinder the performance, right? And then thirdly, it seems that still you should use the markdown formatting just like we were doing in the long structured formatting because it seems to still perform better with that markdown formatting. But we'll see how this develops in the upcoming weeks and months. Now, I think this GPT-01 model will become very interesting for these agent systems because, as I said, these agents have a lot of responsibility at the moment, and that's why they sometimes fail, right? And if we can get a GPT-01 model to basically generate this SOP for our agents, we basically take some responsibility out of our agent hand, and they can just execute on these tasks instead of coming up with the SOP for a specific request. I think it will improve the reliability of our systems a lot. So I see a lot of potential in using this GPT-01 to basically generate this specific SOP for each request before letting our agent execute on these tasks, right? And using the tools, etc. Because of course, GPT-01 at the moment, we can't use tool calling, so we can't use it as our actual agent. So now I want to go over the most common prompting use cases and my recommendation for which prompting framework to use and which language model to use. So first we have extracting data. Now again, of course, this is a very broad categorization, right? There's lots of types of extracting data, and I also included summarization in this. But you'll come across these use cases a lot in designing these AI systems, which is things like extracting URLs from Google search results, getting data, specific data points from a scraped LinkedIn profile, but really any data you capture out of a longer text or even summarization of a longer text, I consider under extracting data. Now, LLMs are actually really good at sort of identifying these specific data points inside of a longer text. So because of that, we can actually get away, in my experience, with short structured prompting. Now, of course, again, take this with a grain of salt because it really depends on the complexity of the task. We have a really complex data extraction prompt. Of course, we're going to go long, but in general, what I see in general, you can get away with short structured prompting. And also because these language models are so good at it, we can also get away with using these cheaper models, right? So I'm a big fan of GPT-4o Mini, very cheap and seems to perform really well. So, but any of the cheaper model will probably do this, right? So we can, this use case, we can get usually away with short structured prompting, right? Then we have the second one, which is classification or categorization. And now common use cases, for example, email categorization or topic classification. Now, this depends a little on the complexity of the categorization. Now, if it's a really easy one, we can get away with short structured prompting. For example, in the example here, classify the email below as action needed or no action needed. Really simple way of categorizing. Now, again, these LLMs are really good at this, so we can get away with short structured prompting and with cheaper models. Right now, when you get to subjective classification or categorization, so not action needed or no action needed, but maybe something more subjective is like really important and low priority and medium priority. Like we have to give the model context on when we believe something is medium or low priority. And of course, then we need a long prompt to actually give the rules and the instructions of when to classify it in which way, right? So this really depends on the type of classification or categorization. But in general, even with these subjective classifications, in my experience, you can still get away with cheaper models, right? Then we have the third one, which is generating content. Again, really broad category, of course, but basically I mean to say that this one is any use case of prompting where you're generating content out of nothing, right? And you could think of writing blog posts, write analysis, write an email, but anything it's generating, or even image generation, etc. Now, because this is the hardest for LLMs and it's where they hallucinate most and make most mistakes, we want to really go long structured prompting here, give it as much context as possible to get the best outcome possible. And also, we always want to use the best language models here, right? So GPT-001, some people say that actually for creative writing, some people prefer GPT-4o still. So you have to see what works best for you. But again, for generating content, right, we want to use the best models, right? Because this is the hardest to do for these LLMs. Now, for the next one, we have evaluation. Now, evaluation, in some common use cases that I use, for example, a lot in my systems is evaluation of a vector search output, right? So I have a quick example here. You're an AI assistant responsible for verifying the relevance of search results from vector data against the user's question, right? So we actually check if the result we get from a vector search, for example, when answering a question from a customer, actually makes sense, right? If it relates to the original question, right? So it sort of has to evaluate if that question is right. Now, another example could be sentiment analysis, LLM output quality assessments, which I'm starting to use more and more too. So evaluation is a little bit subjective in general, and therefore, and depends highly on the context. So therefore, in general, I go for long structured prompts, give it as much context and details as possible to get the best outcomes. And also, in general, in my experience, use the best models for this. Also because these tasks are usually very important in your overall system functioning well. So that's just my recommendation for the evaluation use case. Then we have data transformation, right? So very common too in these AI systems, right? For example, you need specific formatting, like the example I gave before, right? We need a CV in a specific format, new format. We need JSON outputs. We need HTML formatting for maybe making a nice Google Docs or whatever. In general, again, models are pretty good at these data transformations. So we can do short structured prompting. But again, this depends because, for example, this CV formatter tool I used before, I used long structured prompt because, the output specifications was very specific and very long. And there were quite some things that could go wrong. So in that case, I gave it a long structured prompt. But if we just go like maybe HTML formatting or things like that, in my experience, we can get away with short structured prompting. Although in my experience, we really have to put in those input and output examples in these short structured prompts. And even if we go with short, in my experience, for this data transformation, it's better to go with the higher quality models, the best models, to get consistent outcomes. And then lastly, of course, we have decision making, which is, again, our AI agents, right? And of course, we're always going to use our best models because this is the hardest sort of task to do for these LLMs. And because it usually has multiple responsibilities, we always go with the best models, right? And we use the agent prompting framework. Now, lastly, if you're using Relevance AI, there are a few more prompting use cases, right? So we have tool input prompting, sub-agent prompting, labeling and naming tasks, and we have the flow builder. So very quickly, if you use Relevance AI, I'll go over it very quickly. So first we have tool input prompting, right? So basically, when we make a tool, right, we have here the name of the tool and the description of the tool. Now, these are actually read by our agent. So we actually want to name this in a way that makes it easy for the agent to understand what this tool actually does, right? So get emails, this tool retrieves emails or inbox emails from my inbox, right? So just describing very quickly what this tool actually does will help your agent use it better, right? Then we have the same basically for the user inputs, right? So the name of the user input will also be read by your agent, right? Read, unread emails, use only unread. So basically this part, the description of our user input, is basically a prompt to our agent on how to fill it out, right? So we can tell it directly, use only unread when retrieving new unread emails, etc. Right? So we actually want to describe here what our agent should do, or what your agent should choose in this case with the dropdown, or what it should put in, right? Or default value. Like we can really prompt it here. And then also important in my experience is send clean data back to your agent. So we don't want to, for example, we scrape a website, right? Or we get 50 emails back from our inbox. We don't want to send this blob of text that is completely unorganized back to our agent, because basically we're giving another task, not a responsibility to our agent, which is cleaning up data. And because our agent is already a little bit overwhelmed with the amount of things he has to do, we want to make it his life as simple as possible and send clean data back to our agent. So yeah, just have a quick example. Summarize each email below, right? So this is from the get email tool in 30 words in a concise way. Still include all relevant info. Make sure to mention an action item. So I just sent back to the agent a very concise summary of each email instead of a blob of text of 30 emails, and then he will have to summarize and do all kinds of other things before he sends it back to me, right? Then we have sub-agent prompting. So important prompt techniques for sub-agents, right? So in the sub-agent section of your manager agent, you have a setting there, which is called prompt for how to use, right? This is basically, you can double down and tell your manager agent again what this sub-agent does, right? That's all you do. This agent gathers competitor data from review sites, Google News, blogs, etc. So again, we double down and we let our manager agent very clearly know what this agent can do, right? Then we have another option there, which is a template for communication, right? So as I said before, we want to sort of make sure that our manager agent clearly communicates to our sub-agent with the things he has to do, because if he doesn't, our system fails, right? So we can do this through a template for communication, right? So we can say, please do a competitor. This is from another agent, right? But please do a competitor research on this for the past these days, right? So we can sort of specify that he always has to say this to our sub-agent, right? To make sure that our sub-agent receives all the data he needs to actually perform his actions, right? And then we can add in these variables here. These variables, we can basically then here, you can see companies define again in another prompt to our agent on how to actually fill in these variables, right? So I'll tell him the companies that have to be researched, right? The platforms that have to be researched, right? So a lot of prompting here, but yes, it can be helpful, right? Like I notice, even if you just add it in the system prompt, like how to communicate, it works quite well already, but you can really double down on the reliability through these templates for communication, right? Then we have another way to double down on that, letting our manager agent know what our sub-agent does, which is in the agent profile of the sub-agent. We have the agent description and the agent name. And again, we want to describe there very well what this sub-agent does, because our manager agent will read that. And then what I also do in terms of the sub-agents, and I'm not sure if this is actually necessary or if this is just hard-coded in, but I always tell my sub-agents to always report back the information or to my manager agent, right? I don't know if this is actually necessary, but I usually do it. I add it in the SOP, right? As the last step, you report back all the links back to your manager agent, right? And also make clear what he has to send back, right? And then, and I also add that actually in the flow builder. And then we have another few prompting things inside of Relevance AI specifically, which is the first one is labeling tasks. So basically we can sort of organize our dashboard and sort of have labels for what has been done with each task, right? And basically this is a prompt too, right? So we can say blog posted, right? And that's the actual label, right? And then we prompted when to give it that label, right? So after post to Webflow, tool successfully run, right? So you can do this if you want to sort of organize it a little bit better or have a better overview. In my experience, I'm not a huge fan of this because I notice sometimes it runs into errors because of this feature specifically. Because from my understanding, it's basically just a tool that Relevance AI added in the background. But if you want to get better organization, you can use this. And then we have one more thing, which is naming task, right? Basically same thing, but instead of putting labels, we can also name the different tasks in a specific way. And here in the advanced settings, we have an option for instructions for naming tasks. There we can basically tell our agent how to name these tasks, right? Use the video title for naming the task, for example. Now, again, I'm not a huge fan because we're already overwhelming these agents usually with tasks to do. And if we do these things too, you can imagine the reliability might go down a bit. And then lastly, we have the flow builder, also specific for Relevance AI. Now, this becomes important when you have like a very specific SOP or a very complicated SOP that has to be followed, right? You can basically just double down on that SOP in your prompt because it is very difficult sometimes to write out in language an SOP. You're writing out conditions, etc. inside of a prompt. It's not very easy to do, so that's why we can use this flow builder to sort of double down on that and make it clearer, right? And in my experience, when you need it, when there is this sort of complicated SOP, it really helps to do this. Now, I'm not gonna go in detail, but basically what you can do is just instruction, right? Do this, then do this, then do this. And then if you want, you can add in a condition, and then you have a separate sort of tree that it has to follow if this condition was met or that condition was met. So use it if you have a complicated SOP. Now, lastly, I just updated my AI agent prompt helper tool. Now, again, it doesn't replace prompting, but it helps you write them better and faster, right? Because it can be quite time consuming to write these good agent prompts, but they are very important. So that's really what this tool does. So here I have it, right? Make sure to also share this AI agent prompt helper tool inside of my community for free, so you can use it yourself. So you can see here, this tool is meant to help you save time and optimize prompts for AI agent and AI agent teams. You can keep input short and fast. The tool will do the rest. Your SOP is the only one that should be actually detailed, right? Because my prompt helper can't come up with your specific SOP. So the idea is you could just type it in very quickly and it automatically sort of improves clarity. It expands a little on the prompt and it also adds in those proven best practices automatically, right? And then most importantly, maybe it auto-generates the example section and the notes section, because this can also be quite consuming. Now, it is important to actually double check if that example section makes sense, right? Before you actually put it out. And it also formats your prompts in a Markdown format. So I just put in a quick example here, right? You could just type it in very quickly. You're Ben's personal assistant for Ben, right? You handle his task related to his email inbox. So it can be very short, and our prompt helper tool will sort of expand on it and add these proven best practices. Context, you're doing this to help Ben manage his personal administration, right? Now the SOP I actually wrote out, right? Instructions, the rules very quickly, and the tools and sub-agents. And then we can run the tool. We don't have to add in the examples. And you can see now generated the prompt, the AI agent prompt. You can see you're an expert personal assistant for Ben. Now it added that sort of, extra sort of role prompt with the expert or world class with a particular knack for managing, right? It added in the qualities, right? Your goal is, it expanded a bit on the objective, and it added in things step by step, right? The SOP is still the same, and it added in the instructions the emotional manipulation tricks, right? It is vital to my career. I will tip you, blah, blah, blah. And it expanded a bit on the tools and sub-agents, and you can see it generated examples, right? So schedule a meeting with Dr. Smith at 10 a.m. next Monday, right? And you can see the output is like his SOP, an example of an SOP. Now let's see if it actually did it right. Decide which agent, use calendar manager agent, did it right? Communicate clearly to each, please schedule a meeting with Dr. Smith at 10 a.m. next Monday, Sao Paulo time. So did it well, right? And always communicate updates back to Ben. Meeting with Dr. Smith scheduled for 10 a.m. next Monday. So you can see, did it perfectly, the examples, so you don't have to waste time with this, right? Did another one, add buy groceries to my to-do list. And then it also added in the notes section where it basically doubled down on his perspective, my tool's perspective on the most important rules or things to follow, right? So again, it doesn't replace your prompting, but it might help you write them a little bit better and a little bit faster. So that's it for this video. I hope this was useful. I added in one more thing here, which is an LLM pricing calculator, which I found very useful when you're trying to price these systems for clients, when you're trying to, because it's sometimes very hard to predict the LLM pricing when you start running this on large volume of tasks. So usually what I try to do is run these systems once through this OpenAI API price calculator. We can basically put in prompts and outputs, and through that you can sort of see the cost, right? So you can do that, run your whole system through, which is a little bit of a hassle, but once to see the price per one run, and therefore you can then calculate how much this will cost if they run it on 5,000 or 10,000 tasks. Now that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you're still watching and if you got any value out of it, I would highly appreciate if you can like and subscribe and maybe leave a comment. Again, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.